Alright, this will be my video of the timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe to get people ready to watch Avengers Doomsday and eventually Avengers Secret Wars. I'm gonna cover the universe timeline as accurately as possible, and I will also include all the multiverse projects that are tied into the Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline. Um, So yeah, this is kind of going to be shot so that it's a good explanation for people that are brand new. So the multiverse is basically a concept that multiple realities exist. Um, and that explains why there's like different movie and TV show continuities. This also has to do with Marvel having financial troubles back in the 90s, and they had to sell off like movie, TV show, video game rights to various different studios, and those various studios did kind of their own thing with it, and that's why a lot of the early stuff isn't connected to each other because each studio's doing their own thing. So I also want to put a homework warning. So as of recording this, there have been a lot of fans that have kind of felt fatigued and watching so many different projects. So this will be a pretty long list of projects, but I will try to give some time-saving suggestions so that you can skip certain things if you're running short on time for when the movies come out, or you just want to come back to them later because they aren't necessarily significant um, as of right now. Um, so I'm gonna start off with all the different projects that I recommend watching prior to getting into the actual Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline, so that way you're not skipping back and forth as much. Um, and for a while, once you get into the Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline, Um, none of those will be tied to it for quite some time, but they will eventually have either outright crossovers or at least some sort of references, either just being mentioned or having Easter eggs to their existence. Um, like I said, I'm trying to make this um, kind of friendly to new people coming in, so I'm gonna try and keep spoilers to minimum. So I won't cover exactly how they're connected, where they're connected, but I'm just going over all of them in general. And then these I have obviously in a certain order here, but they can be watched. These first few that are in alternate realities can be watched in any order. Like you'll see, there's a Blade universe, there's a Fantastic Four universe, there's an X-Men universe, and you can watch those whatever order you want. Um, so the first one is Spider-Man 1967 cartoon. I would recommend only watching season one. My personal opinion is season one is by far the best season. When you got into the second and third seasons, they kind of did some weird stuff like recycling footage. Um, and I believe in the first season, even there's like two episodes that are almost exactly identical. They just changed the ending. Um, yeah, it had something to do with like mole people stealing buildings from the surface. And yeah, they just reused the same episode, but then changed the ending, like I said. But yeah, and then they had like two episodes that featured the Rhino in the first season, and then by season three, they combined footage from those first two episodes to make a brand new episode. Um, so yeah, you get a lot of the classic villains, and I'd say more classic fun, 60s style cartoons vibe off the first episode, and I believe they ran into some problems too, that the original studio that made this show ended up going bankrupt, so a new studio had to take over the show. Um, but there are there's a certain scene in season one of this show that is referenced later on in other projects. And yeah, like I said, season one, if you just want to save time. But if you want to save even more time, you could just completely skip this. Like I said, there will be a reference to it. You might not understand the reference to it if you skip it, but just to save time, so either just watch season one or just skip the whole show. Then Spider-Man 81 and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I put these together. There's been some debate on whether or not these are actually intended to be the same universe. For the most part, people assume they are. I know, like in Spider-Man 81, they kind of give an origin story for the Green Goblin, and then by Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, they almost again reuse that same story. There's some tweaks, but it's like almost identical. So you would think it's almost a completely different universe and continuity. Um, so I would say for time saving, you could completely skip Spider-Man 81. There is a reference to Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends in a later project, but it's just a minor Easter egg. So if you want to, you could skip both of these in theory. Spider-Man Unlimited. Um, Again, this is one that's later referenced in a project, and it's pretty minor. So if you just want to skip the whole thing, you can. And then there's the Spectacular Spider-Man, where again, this is referenced in a later project, but it was very minor, so you could skip this entire thing. Uh, then you have the Insomniac video game universe that features Spider-Man, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2, and as of recording this, they're going to have a Wolverine game. You can find gameplay movies if you're not able to play it, but you can find them on YouTube. Um, Again, this is another minor reference, and so the entire universe is skippable. Then you have the Spider-Man trilogy from Sam Raimi. Um, that's Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3. This one is going to have a pretty big impact, so I'd recommend watching all these. Um, then the Amazing Spider-Man duology of The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Um, yeah, these again will be pretty significant later on. I did put a note that these do have post-credit scenes, but they end up going nowhere because the series was ultimately canceled by Sony. And so you can watch the post-credit scenes if you want, but it won't be significant. Uh, then you have Punisher 1989 movie. Um, Again, this is one where it just gets referenced. Um, there's no direct crossover, so just seeing this and knowing that it's connected might just be enough to understand the reference. So this movie is skippable if you want to. And The Punisher 2004, basically the same thing. This kind of has a bigger Easter egg in a later project, more than the other Punisher movie does, but as of right now, it's completely skippable. Punisher Warzone, basically same thing. It's skippable, but it is referenced later on. Then you have the Daredevil movies, and this is the Daredevil movie, not the Daredevil TV show. We'll get into that later. Um, yeah, this is another pretty significant series of the Daredevil movie and then the Elektra movie. So we'll watch those. Then you have the Fantastic Four and the Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer. These movies will be pretty significant too. Then you have the Blade universe, which is made up of the Blade, Blade 2, Blade Trinity, and then they had a Blade TV series. Um, I'd at the very least watch the movies. The TV show is pretty skippable. And then the Inhumans. This one's kind of a special note just off of my personal opinion and where I place it. I'll kind of get into the history of Marvel Television and its relation to Marvel Studios in a bit. So this um technically is my own personal placement as it exists in its own universe. It um the show does have some connections to MCU because when Marvel Television made this, it was their intention that it took place in the MCU, but it was such a failure of a show that Marvel Television never wanted to reference it after the first season aired, and then Marvel Studios didn't want to reference really anything from Marvel Television. Um, so it is skippable, but in the way I have it set up as its own universe, it kind of has some payoff in the MCU projects later on, so you can skip this. Otherwise, like I said, there is some payoff in a way, at least in my personal placement of this. Then you have the Fox's X-Men universe, and I'll be going over my personal arrangement of it. So basically, this is one of the hard parts of these larger universes like this one and the MCU is that you have some projects that actually have overlapping events, or there's like certain movies do time skips or flashbacks, so it's kind of hard to put exactly where a full movie could take place. It's not like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's kind of this happens in these years, and then there's a time skip where parts of another movie take place, and then you would technically go back to the original movie because that's basically how I have like X-Men Origins Wolverine and X-Men First Class. Some of their events actually overlap each other, so it's kind of you'd have to almost edit the movies to take place when they're supposed to in relation to each other. But this is my just full movie arrangement of them of X-Men Origins Wolverine, X-Men First Class, X-Men X2, X-Men The Last Stand, the Wolverine, X-Men Days of Future Past. Um yeah, and, uh, I kind of put this here because they get into some time travel stuff where they kind of rewrite history. So that's why like the next few take place in like the 80s and 90s. So it's kind of a revised history of the timeline. So then X-Men Apocalypse, X-Men Dark Phoenix, The New Mutants, Deadpool, Deadpool 2, Once Upon a Deadpool, and Logan. X-Men Dark Phoenix is skippable. Um, Once Upon a Time, or Once Upon a Deadpool, sorry, um, is skippable. It's basically just a PG-13 remake of Deadpool 2, but there are new jokes, especially if you're a fan of the movie The Princess Bride. They kind of borrow heavily from that movie. Um, yeah, I think that's all the notes there. Um, then yeah, some of the movies do have post-credit scenes. X-Men Origins Wolverine has one, but it's skippable if you don't want to stick around for it. Um, then X-Men The Last Stand, The Wolverine, X-Men Days of Future Past, the Rogue Cut has an extra one. X-Men Apocalypse, Deadpool, and Deadpool 2 all have post-credit scenes. Um, for the most part, those are kind of important post-credit scenes, so I'd watch those. And then special mention to the universe is the Gambit movie. So basically, Fox was going to make a Gambit movie starring Channing Tatum, but they just kept pushing it off, and then eventually they started putting. If you watch some of the movies, there's some stuff they do for setup that seemed like it would tie into this movie. but it eventually just kept getting pushed off, pushed off, pushed off, and then Fox ended up selling to Disney, and so the movie was never made. But it's important to have this movie in mind because it actually does end up getting referenced later on. Some other special mentions is Fox's Fantastic Four from 2015 and Sony's Ghost Rider and Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance movies. As of recording this, they have not been officially connected. However, they were going to be connected to a project that's already been released. However, there were some uh, logistical and financial issues that kind of prevented those from actually making it into the other movie. But I'm just throwing this out there because they could potentially be connected in Avengers Doomsday. There's been some rumors about Ghost Rider appearing in Avengers Doomsday, but as of right now, there's been some people saying it's Nicolas Cage from the Ghost Rider movies, but then other people are saying it's a different Ghost Rider, a completely new one. And then I know there's a bunch of fans that want Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four movie to come back as the Maker, kind of an evil version. So it's possible they show up later on. Don't know as of right now, but just figured I'll add those in case you want to watch them, just in case they are connected, then you understand those references. All right, now Marvel Studios and Marvel Television. So a lot of people like to put these together because they know they're both Marvel companies. And this is going back a few years because I know now there is a new Marvel Television, but there was a Marvel Television years ago that wasn't under Marvel Studios control. So basically, you have to think of these as two different companies. Marvel Studios is kind of doing their own thing. Marvel Television is kind of doing their own thing. So basically, how this worked was Marvel Studios started the MCU, and it was so popular that Disney wanted to expand the MCU beyond just theatrical movie releases. So they had Marvel Television start creating shows to put on their channels like ABC, ABC.com, Hulu, and Freeform, and then even Netflix. Uh, but there was always this kind of thing that Marvel Studios did not want to acknowledge Marvel Television's involvement like at all. And if you watch Marvel Television projects, they do have stuff that ties into the movies, but the movies would never acknowledge the TV shows for most of the time. Eventually they kind of do, and I'll get into that later, or I'll put it in a different video. Um, so I always felt like it was almost like Marvel Studios was like I explain it as like the cool older brother, and then Marvel Television was the younger brother that always wanted to hang out with Marvel Studios, the cool older brother, and then you had Disney telling them to play nice. So it was more like Marvel Studios would kind of ignore Marvel Television, but they wouldn't outright say Marvel Television projects were non-canon because they knew that would anger Disney. Um, but eventually, um, Marvel Studios was took over Marvel Television, and that's about when they started putting content on Disney Plus. Um, and Marvel Studios would actually eventually just disband Marvel Television and take over everything else until like a few years later they ended up creating their own Marvel Television division because it was just too much for how they had Marvel Studios set up that they needed to create Marvel Television, Marvel Animation to lessen the burden directly on Marvel Studios. And yeah, there were some shows, the shows that were on Netflix, um, those were considered non-canon until eventually there were some like set leaks from the Daredevil Born Again set that got fans angry, and eventually Marvel Studios released basically a trailer for when they were releasing the Echo show that they officially retconned those shows into continuity. So there are some continuity errors because Marvel Studios wasn't originally planning on having them as part of their story. And then going into the MCU timeline, uh, I will include the Marvel television projects with some explanations. For the most part, I'd consider them skippable because, of course, they are not officially, as of right now, considered canon by Marvel Studios. But if you want to watch them, you can. And of course, like I said before, none of them were considered canon, but then they retconned some of them. And there's some stuff coming up that maybe they might retcon even more so that they are included officially. So yeah, this is yeah, going over all the Netflix shows that they weren't considered canon, but then there was backlash from some leaks of what how the story was going to go in Daredevil Born Again, and they had to backtrack on what they said. And then, as part of this, this is kind of an explanation on why the other stuff isn't considered canon, but could be. So there was an interview with Brad Winderbaum, the head of TV streaming and animation at Marvel Studios, and he was asked, since the Netflix shows uh, were officially canonized, could Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. be canon? And he said, I want to go down that road with you. You know I do, but we're just gonna take a deep breath for a second. Just know that I love that cast. I love Clark Gregg, and I love that show. So that was basically his answer to that question. Now, I'm just putting this out there as a personal note that basically what he said was kind of a no, but it is not an outright no. So it could still be canon, but I'm just thinking he doesn't want to give a solid no because they already gave a solid no to like the Netflix Defender series, and then they had to walk that back. So him not giving an outright no kind of leaves the door open to the future of Agents of Shield characters. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Um, so after this, I'm gonna go into the actual MCU timeline, and there will be some other universes that I didn't include prior to this because they're more connected at specific points where their story kind of interconnects directly to movies, where the other ones they can be on their own and then connected later. Again, I'll include the Marvel television projects. Um, and then, yeah, these are the ones that are not considered canon: Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Slingshot, Agent Carter, Runaways, Cloak and Dagger, and Hellstrom. Um, and I also wanted to note that almost all the movies have mid and post credit scenes. And then when they got into the TV shows on Disney Plus, there were some shows that have post-credit scenes, some that don't, and then even within those that had post-credit scenes, they put them in at different points. I didn't put a whole rundown on which ones have it because I think like WandaVision, if I'm remembering correctly, had two post-credit scenes on the final two episodes maybe, if I'm remembering that correctly. But like the rest of the series never had post-credit scenes, so it was kind of a weird way of doing it. The either yeah, it'd be easier if they didn't have any, or if they just saved a post-credit scene for the final episode. Yeah. Okay. And then as for this timeline, like I kind of mentioned during the X-Men part, Um, this isn't going to be a perfect timeline for various reasons. Like all the movies and TV shows have different time jumps, flashbacks, and overlapping events like Nick Fury's Big Week. If you're familiar with that, basically, it's kind of a side story that they did. If you watch the movies after the first Iron Man movie, they have events that take place over the time span of a week for like four different movies. And then they did have a comic book that they released to help explain that a little further, and then it is explained um kind of in a what if episode. But so I'm just trying to put this together as easy as possible. And it will not be perfect. And again, if you include the Marvel television shows that aren't considered canon, there's some issues, especially getting into the events of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And I also wanted to note, like I've kind of said, um, this is I'm shooting this video in November 2025, so we still have a bunch of projects coming out before Doomsday and Secret Wars, so it could kind of mess with this order, but it's what I have and what I'm working with. So the first one is Eyes of Wakanda, and I also want to go over this too. So for time saver tip, this is kind of skippable, and I wanted to explain that. If I say something's skippable, I'm not saying like it's terrible in any way. I'm just saying um, it's not completely necessary to watch. Um, like Eyes of Wakanda is a good show and everything, but as of now, it it does have stuff that ties into other things, but they're not that necessary. So that's what I mean by skippable. Um, yeah. So, and then Captain Marvel. I wanted to note that it has a post-credit scene that takes place after Avengers Infinity War. So, um, you can it depends how you want to deal with that. It's not nothing, I guess, too spoilery in a way, I guess it is. So it's kind of up to you whether you just want to skip the post-credit scene and watch it later, so that it makes more sense and it doesn't have a spoiler for you. But otherwise, you could watch it and just use it as like a flash forward of like a preview of what you're gonna get in the future movies. So yeah, watch the movie, but then the post-credit scene, it's kind of up to you on where you want to watch it, taking that into consideration. And I'll explain why I have Captain Marvel here ahead of Captain America, the first Avenger, when I get to it. Then you have Iron Man, then the Incredible Hulk, and then you have the Consultant, the one shot. Again, that one is skippable. I'd say most of the one shots are skippable because they're kind of just either fun little stories to tell on the side that don't have any impact, or um, they're kind of used to help explain something that wasn't maybe clear, or they wanted to retcon, like in the case of the Consultant. That's kind of used as an explanation of the ending of The Incredible Hulk, but it's nothing extremely major. Then Iron Man 2, then a funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer, one shot. Again, that's just kind of a fun little Agent Coulson story, that's skippable. Then Thor, then Captain America, the First Avenger. The reason why I have Captain America, the First Avenger here is a lot of people will put it um ahead of like Captain Marvel because most of the movie is about World War II. But in my mind, it's a flashback movie, so the movie opens up in like modern day at this point on the timeline. then flashes back to give you the story of what they're doing at the very beginning, and then it'll come back to modern day at the end. And the modern day part takes place during Nick Fury's big week, which was happening across the Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, um, those events. So that's why, to me, this can be watched where I have it versus ahead of Captain Marvel, because then if you watched it before Captain Marvel, some of the modern day Nick Fury's big week things would be happening even before the events of Iron Man, which is not what happens. So that's just my personal placement of it. And then Agent Carter one shot and TV show. I wanted to explain this. So Marvel Studios made an Agent Carter one shot, which was basically just an adventure mission that Peggy Carter goes on after the events of the World War II events of Captain America, the First Avenger. And that one shot is considered by Marvel Studios to be canon because they made it. Later on, Marvel Television made an Agent Carter TV show. Now, as of right now, that show is not considered canon by Marvel Studios. Um, but I will say the show actually does have some payoff in a future Marvel Studios project, and potentially another one that's still coming out um, as of right now next year, 2026. Um, the one shot has not had any payoff as of yet. I mean, it kind of has, I guess in a way it does, but it's not really as surprising as interesting a connection as the TV show has. Um, so I did put down here that the showrunner for the TV show says that both the one shot and uh the the TV show are canon. They even use part of the one shot in the beginning of the TV series, during the opening credits. But watched it several times, and other people have watched it several times, and you basically can tell there's like no continuity between the two. So I don't know if them both being canon is just a way of making Marvel Studios happy rather than having someone from Marvel Television saying something from Marvel Studios isn't canon. So, me personally, if I was going to prioritize one, I'd prioritize the TV show over the one shot. Um, but that's just, again, my personal note. Um, then Time Saver, they're both potentially skippable, and I'll possibly go over the TV show in another video when I more directly talk about the Marvel television projects and how they could still technically have a chance of being canon in the future. All right, then you go into the Avengers. Then you have the Item 47 one shot. Again, this is skippable. Iron Man 3. Then you have All Hail the King one shot. Um, I will say it's probably skippable, but it is also at the same time probably the most important one shot compared to the other ones because these events are directly referenced in um, a future project too. Um, but the reference is done in a way that you kind of don't need to watch the one shot at all. So that's why I say it's skippable. So then this is where we get into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1, Episodes 1 through 7. Again, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Um, is not considered canon at this time. Again, November 2025, when I'm recording this. So that is skippable if you want. If you have time to watch it, then it should fit in pretty well. And then you get into Thor the Dark World, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1, Episodes 8 through 16. Again, skippable. Captain America the Winter Soldier, then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1, Episode 17 through 22. Again, skippable. Then you get to Guardians of the Galaxy. Then I Am Groot Season 1, Episode 1. This is skippable. I put this here because um, this episode takes place shortly after the events of Guardians of the Galaxy. The rest of the I Am Groot series takes place during the credits of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So that's why I have this one separated on its own. Um, yeah, like I said, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which takes place a couple months after the first movie. And then the rest of I Am Groot Season 1 and 2. And they should be watched after the main movie of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, because basically I'm Groot stars Baby Groot, and there is a credit scene uh, in Volume 2 where Groot is then a teenager, so obviously when he's a baby, it would take place before that. But for the most part, as of now, the entire series of I Am Groot is pretty skippable. It's pretty much just a show that was made just for fun to get a draw from people that like Baby Groot. Then Daredevil season 1, so this is the show that was on Netflix. Then Jessica Jones season 1, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 2, episodes 1 through 19. Again, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is not considered canon, so it's skippable. Then Avengers Age of Ultron, then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 2, episodes 20 through 22. Again, skippable. Then Ant-Man, then Daredevil season 2, then Luke Cage season 1, and then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 3, episodes 1 through 19. Again, skippable. Captain America Civil War, and this is kind of one of the big ones too, where this has overlapping events through uh, these movies where they kind of you have Civil War happen, and then you have different branches branching out where somebody does something like during the events of Civil War, and then it take the rest of the movie, like basically Black Widow. Um, some of that takes place during Civil War, and then the rest of the movie takes place after the events of Civil War, but at the same time, you have the events of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 3, episodes 20 and 22 happening. You have the events of Black Panther happening, and you have the events of Spider-Man Homecoming happening. So it can kind of get a little weird on which exact order you want to watch those in. Um, so that's why I keep saying that this timeline's kind of weird because you'd have to really edit all these down and figure out days and months, and it's especially hard with Spider-Man Homecoming because that famously has a continuity error with a time skip it has in it, which throws the years off of what year it's supposed to be in the MCU. Then you have pretty much Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 4, along with the events of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Slingshot. Again, both of these, as of right now, are considered non canon. Then you have Iron Fist Season 1, The Defenders Season 1, The Punisher Season 1, then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 5, episodes 1 through 19. Again, skippable. Jessica Jones season 2 and Luke Cage season 2, Iron Fist season 2, Daredevil season 3, The Punisher season 2, Jessica Jones season 3. Then you have Runaways seasons 1 and 2. Again, this is skippable. And then you have Cloak and Dagger season 1 and 2. And there is actually a crossover event between Runaways and Cloak and Dagger. Um, so that's why you watch those together. So otherwise, again, they're as of right now not considered canon, even though you get a few references to some of the Defenders characters in Cloak and Dagger. Then you have Runaways season 3, again, skippable. Then you get to Doctor Strange, then Thor Ragnarok, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 5, episodes 20 through 22, again, skippable. Then Ant-Man and the Wasp. The post-credit scene can be watched after Avengers Infinity War. Again, it's kind of like the Captain Marvel post-credit scene where it can work if you save it for later, if you don't want a spoiler, but at the same time, I think it is a nice, flash forward teaser of what's to come. So that'll be up to your own personal preference. Then Avengers Infinity War, and then like if you skipped um the Ant-Man and the Wasp post-credit scene, you can watch it now. And if you skip the Captain Marvel post-credit scene, you can watch it now. They'll make a lot more sense. Uh, then you have Agents of Shield season 6, again non-canon, and this kind of gets where the continuity errors are most prevalent because this was really a huge divide between Marvel Studios and Marvel Television, which were kind of playing nice earlier. They now weren't because Marvel Studios wasn't telling Marvel Television what they were doing for the events of Avengers Infinity War. They wanted to keep that top secret, so you'll see that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 6 is supposed to take place during and after the events of Infinity War, which has pretty significant impact. And you would think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. would address it. And again, that's simply because when they were making those seasons, they just did not know what Marvel Television had planned. So they just couldn't do it because they weren't sharing information. And then you have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 7. Again, skippable. Then you have Avengers Endgame. And then you have, yeah, I think I might have missed that, but Black Widow does have a post-credit scene that takes place after Avengers Endgame. So again, um, you could watch that during Black Widow, but it's pretty heavy with spoilers unless you want to use it as again a flash forward teaser. Then I have Loki season 1 and season 2, which technically starts during Avengers Endgame. And then season 2 does have a reference to an upcoming movie towards the end, but it's kind of hard with the Loki stuff, especially when you're getting into the multiverse and the TVA, the Time Variance Authority that's introduced during the Loki project, is because they operate in a space that's kind of, or a dimension that's kind of outside of space and time. So, like they say, time works differently there. So you could argue you can have some wonky timeline stuff happening because it just doesn't work the same where they exist. So that's kind of why I have it set up like this. And then getting into the What If series, uh, at so if you don't know, what if they made episodes that reference the different movies? So I kind of set up this watching order for what if based off of what has already been released and what you'll be able to watch an episode and have um you should have the knowledge to be like, oh, that's a reference to that movie, that's a reference to that movie. So that's why um you can watch at this point all of season 1 because it only references um the Infinity Saga movies. And then getting into season 2, episodes 1 through 6, again, those are more heavily um, Infinity Saga based episodes, where later episodes in season 2 have references to more specific movies that you wouldn't understand if you watched all of season 2 at this point. So now this will jump over to Earth 688b. Um, because this is when we're really getting into the multiverse. So, first one that most Marvel fans probably won't want me to reference at all, but I'll just throw this out there, is Madam Web. So, this takes place within that universe in the early 2000s at some point, but basically this movie is widely considered terrible. And it was a huge failure for Sony. So I would skip this. If you don't know, this universe was made by Sony kind of just to keep making profit off of them owning the Spider-Man movie rights. So they weren't completely constrained working with Marvel Studios and Disney, um, being beholden to their MCU timeline uh, release of movies that they could make money on the side with the movies and have crossover with the MCU, so they're kind of using Marvel Studios to boost their own movies. Um, but this universe is kind of, I've heard conflicting stories. I've heard that either one, it's completely canceled. Otherwise, I've heard Sony's just taking a break because most of these movies that are set in this universe were huge financial failures. Um, I've heard they're just taking a break to try and coordinate an actual story so that they can continue this later on, but with better storytelling. But as of right now, we'll see. So then the next movie is Venom. This one is pretty important, so watch that one. And then that movie also, Venom, also helps set up Earth 1610B. This is the Spider-Verse movie series, at least the main Earth within that story. So I'd watch this one. It's pretty important. Still kind of not sure how much of an impact it'll have on the MCU as of right now, but there's definitely potential there if you watch the movies. There's definitely references that open up the possibilities to being more interconnected. Now back to the MCU timeline. This is where I have WandaVision, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Eternals, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, Moon Knight Season 1. Then I have Thor Love and Thunder, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, Ironheart Season 1, She-Hulk Attorney at Law Season 1. And I put some season numbers on here because there's been rumors and stuff that some of these might get season twos, but it's kind of up in the air as of right now. Then going back to Earth 688b, we have Venom Let There Be Carnage. Um, Definitely watch this one too because it'll be important. Um, and that's and then going back in the MCU, and then this is my warning that kind of at this point in the MCU, this is where we're getting most of those multiversal references to all those previous movies, the Punisher movies, the Spider-Man movies, the X-Men movies, the Daredevil movies, the Blade movies, um, yeah, and some of those Spider-Man cartoons are going to be referenced more. So then we have Spider-Man Far From Home, and then Spider-Man No Way Home, then back to Earth 688B, I believe one last time. You have Morbius, which has some stuff that's connected to the MCU, but I will give you a fair warning on that one. Um, it has a connection, but if you're paying attention to some of the previous Spider-Man MCU movies, it kind of won't make sense. And the director of Morbius actually outright said he had no idea what was going on in the MCU Spider-Man movies. He was just told certain things. So there is 100% some confusing continuity going on there, and we have yet to see how exactly they're going to deal with those continuity errors. So I just watched that just in case they tie that in at some point. Then you have Venom The Last Dance, which is kind of the continuation from where you last saw Venom and kind of the end of his trilogy. And that sets up some other stuff. Again, not sure what the future of this universe is as of right now. And then you have Craven the Hunter. This one is potentially skippable if you want to. It's again, no idea what the future of this universe holds, so can't say for certain. Then back to the MCU. Then I have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Then I have What If Season 2, Episodes 7 and 9, or 7 through 9. Then back to Earth 1610B for Spider Man Across the Spider Verse. This one sets up the next movie, Spider Man Beyond the Spider Verse, but as of recording this, that movie was delayed and now has a release for, I believe, 2027. So, um, yeah, so again, not sure the full extent of the Spider-Verse movies being tied into the MCU, but besides that, they are just good movies so far. So I'd recommend watching them even just for fun and not necessarily for their ties to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then back to the MCU. So this is where I have Werewolf by Night, Hawkeye Season 1, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, Echo Season 1, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and Secret Invasion Season 1. Then I have What If, an immersive story. This was a VR game based on the What If TV show. This does get referenced in the What If Season 3 finale, but it is pretty skippable. They're actually pretty hard to spot references, but they do exist. But again, it is skippable. It's not like you're not going to understand what's going on. And then just another fun fact is this game does reference Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I believe it uses some footage from an episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Um, but yeah, so it's a video game. You can go on YouTube, watch some gameplay, movies if um, you're not able to actually play it yourself. Um, it's pretty interesting stories, but yeah, it's skippable. Then I have Miss Marvel Season 1, The Marvels, What If Season 3, and this is where you kind of get into some more multiverse jumping, but I just kept it all on here. Marvel Zombies Season 1, Deadpool and Wolverine, Daredevil Born Again Season 1, and Agatha All Along Season 1. And I just wanted to note that, like I have Daredevil Born Again season one here, but it's entirely possible because Daredevil Born Again season two isn't released that like season two picks up right after season one. So, but I just don't know for sure yet, so that's why it's not included here. Then I have Captain America Brave New World, Thunderbolts, and the Fantastic Four First Steps. Something I didn't include here, but I will note that they did release a comic book. As far as I know, it's only one issue. I don't know if they're planning on doing more, but they released a Fantastic Four First Steps comic book that is supposed to be a comic book that is released in universe. So it's got interviews with like the Fantastic Four in it, and it's supposed to show how they got their powers in more detail than the movie goes over. The movie kind of skips over it because they assume the audience already knows the general idea of how the Fantastic Four got their powers. So that's kind of why I also suggest watching, the Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer movies, because if you don't know, that covers like their origin story, but that is a separate universe, but it'll give you some idea of what you're kind of skipping in this movie. Um, and then I also, so that's basically the end of the MCU timeline again as of November 2025. I wanted to address some of the animated projects because you might see some people arguing that these are part of the MCU. So X-Men 97 and Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. As of right now, making the video, they are not officially connected. I'm kind of putting this in here because I watched someone else's YouTube video and they were going, I believe it was Variety. They were looking through like the MCU project rankings from Variety, I think. I don't remember, but it was some legitimate, widely legitimate news source doing this ranking system, and they got to some of the top MCU projects, and they had X-Men 97 on there, and they might have had Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. I don't remember, but I know X-Men 97 was on there. Um, and it kind of it annoyed that YouTuber, kind of annoyed me, and it kind of annoys MCU fans because I believe they were just put on that list because those shows were made by Marvel Studios, but story-wise, they are not connected to the MCU. So they basically put them on there because of the company it was made by and not the actual MCU story reasons. So, I mean, again, they could be connected later on. I'll explain the Spider-Man thing, but as of recording this, they are not connected, which is why I'm not, pushing them as part of the timeline. I guess I can give a little history of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man show. That one actually was supposed to be um, a different show, and it was the first season was supposed to be Spider-Man freshman year. Season two was going to be Spider-Man sophomore year, and it was going to be an animated show, and it was going to be set in the MCU. It was basically going to cover Peter's origin story as Spider-Man because it kind of gets skipped over in the movies because again they kind of assume the audience has a general idea, especially if you watch the different cartoons and the other movies, you have the general idea of him being bit by a spider, getting his powers. But as they were making the show, the sh- the people working on the show kind of didn't like the fact that they were constrained by the MCU, and they wanted to kind of do their own thing. So they eventually got permission to do their own thing, and so they got rid of Spider-Man freshman year and sophomore year and created Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. So, in a way, if you listen to what they originally were telling the audience about this show, they say it's the same universe as the MCU up to a specific point. Um, Basically, by the events of Captain America Civil War was happening, um, Peter gets a different mentor, and that's kind of where it shoots off. So in a way, that universe is connected to the MCU, but also there is something in Spider-Man um No Way Home that kind of contradicts that whole thing of it's the same universe until about the events of Civil War. There's a few characters and a company um in that show that would in theory be around for at least 40 years or so, if not more. So that universe would be different because those characters and that company don't exist in the MCU. So technically it's a very similar universe to the MCU, but it as of right now is not going to interconnect. Could in the future, but as of right now it's not. So like I said, I'll probably do a Marvel television video where I'll explain why some of the shows could still be included in continuity. Um, uh, so yeah, they're not officially as of right now, and I'll again go over why I put in humans. And I think I'm gonna have some spoilers in that video. I'll try to keep them light, but that video probably will include spoilers just because it helps explain my thinking behind where they could be placed and how they could become canonized in future projects, and it's just easier to give certain examples. But yes, it will be light spoilers, so that way I don't uh, ruin your viewing, but kind of have to get into some details, but I'll keep it limited. And that's about the end of the timeline. Again, as of November 2025. Uh, we still have projects like Wonder Man, Daredevil, Born Again Seasons 2 and 3, The Punisher Special Presentation, Vision Quest, Spider Man Brand New Day, Avengers Doomsday. Sony has Spider Noir coming out, and not entirely sure if that's going to be connected in any way. Spider Man Beyond the Spider Verse, and Avengers Secret Wars. Those are all still coming out, and those could always, change up how the timeline kind of works, but that's just what we're going off of now, and I'll try to update um, the timeline whenever we get um, projects released and wherever they end up setting those projects. So, yep, like, subscribe, and thank you for watching.